let's talk about the communications. Let's start there. Was there a central communications center in place?
Yes, there were. That was provided by the Butler Emergency Services Unit.
And typically, what, was the Secret Service? Did they have a person on the scene, a decision maker on the scene in case an emergency happened?
I believe that there were a Secret Service agent responsible for the scene. However, they were not, to my knowledge, co-located at the command center itself.
And so I want to make clear. So who was present in the communications command center that might have made decisions for Secret Service?
Secret Service, on my understanding, is that the information that was gathered by the command center, which would have been being operated by the Butler Emergency Services Unit and the commander in that capacity. He was responsible for relaying that information to a point of contact he had, and my understanding was that it was over a cell phone as opposed to in-person communications. Is
that normal to have a cell phone communication, or is there usually a body there that can make a decision?
In most security postures and events that I've been part of for these types of events, there is someone actually physically co-located for that reason. Due to the loss of cell phone service, which we experienced that day, a possible loss of radio communications that day. It's a very robust and fail-proof way to communicate because of the level of importance that's needed.
Did you, let's put it this way, were radios and communication implements offered to Secret Service by the local operators?
They were, yes.
And what was the form of the communication?
The form of communication would have been some type of encrypted law enforcement style radio.
And do you know, did the Secret Service avail themselves of that? Did they obtain those radios?
I believe they were offered, but I do not believe they were taken.
So they did not utilize the preferred mechanisms of communications that was offered to them?
That's correct.
Let's talk timeline for a second. So if we look at this timeline, it indicates to us, let me go 5:10, at 5:10 p.m., the shooter is identified as a suspicious person near the AGR building. Does that sound right to what you're understanding of the timeline?
Yes, sir.
And so at least some point, somebody had seen him by 5:10 p.m. That's an hour before the shooting. They adjudicated he was suspicious. And in testimony before the committees of Congress, they indicated to us that, when I say they, I'm talking Cheadle, Rowe, and Ray, the directors and interim directors of Secret Service and FBI. They indicated to us that there's a distinction between a suspicious person and a threat. And so you have a suspicious individual, you have a threat, there's an interim category as well. What's that interim category?
In our line of communications from a SWAT point of view and from a tactical point of view, our escalation of people that we encounter starts out as a suspicious person, then goes to a person of interest, and then from that level upgrades to what we refer to as a threat. And each one of those warrant a different response. So
the actual shooting takes place right about 6:11 p.m. So an hour elapses. How soon after the first identification of the shooter, which is at 5:10 p.m., did you? Well, before we get there, let's lay the foundation. What were you doing that day?
I was in a counter sniper role with one of my teammates in the southwest quadrant of the event center. Distance-wise, it was approximately 238 yards southwest of the podium and approximately 348 southwest of the shooter's final firing position.
And so he was not ever in your sector of responsibility?
Nor in my visual, nor sector, nor visual. Okay. I never had visual.
How soon after he's identified were you given information that, or did you hear information that there was a suspicious character that you should be alerted to?
believe those text messages came across, and just to give some background on the text message tactics. So in this type of event, as tactical officers, we try to build redundancy in communications because it's so critical. We start out in a primary role, which would have been our radios that day, communicating on a designated channel amongst all the tactical operators. Because we were in support of the host agency, which would have been the Butler, the Emergency Services Unit, we also were running a secondary channel that was our local Washington Regional SWAT team channel. On top of that, the snipers and counter snipers, or I should just say the counter snipers, there were no snipers involved in our chat, had set up another chat to be able to provide any type of pictures or any type of relevant media or anything like that that we'd have been able to crosstalk.
So did you ever see any pictures? Were any pictures ever sent to you?
They were. The pictures came across the chat at approximately 5:38.
So about 30 minutes after the shooter, then at that time he was a suspicious individual.
That's correct.
And when he gets up on the roof and he's crawling across the roof, is that what threat assessment would normally be made of that guy at that point?
Sure. I think it's important to mention that, from the time the original pictures were taken, the comment of him possibly having a rangefinder or that he was confirmed to have a rangefinder at that point would have automatically escalated him in our protocols from a suspicious person into a person of interest. And that would have warranted some type of either investigatory detention or a stop and question at that point when the rangefinder became a factor.
Ben, Mr. Shaffer, at what point in that hour or before were you notified of the rangefinder, the use of a rangefinder?
Within minutes of the original information being passed. So I would say shortly after 5:38 p.m. or 17:38.
You said something interesting on an episode of Sean Ryan that I saw a couple weeks ago. You said, thank God it was a 20-year-old kid and not a 10-man Hezbollah team. Can you expound on that a little bit?
Sure, because the fact that a 20-year-old kid could get his drone in the air, could get himself into a firing position only 140 yards away. 140 yards is point-blank range. My then 12-year-old son could have made that shot. Yep. And thank God that 20-year-old aimed at a headshot at President Trump, because if he'd aimed center mass, President Trump would probably be dead, because I don't think he was wearing plates. He wasn't wearing any kind of body armor that would have stopped that rifle round. And a 78-year-old man taking a gunshot wound to the upper chest is not going to go well. A Hezbollah team or ISIS or you name the terrorist organization that actually knows what they're doing would have been successful that day. And the Secret Service was nearly defeated by a 20-year-old, and we all, including Donald Trump, literally dodged a bullet that day.
So I want to double down on that real quick. In your opinion, in your professional opinion, is the Secret Service in its current form and leadership able to stop a threat like that?
President Trump was definitely deprived of resources that day for whatever their political reason. They had 1/3 the amount of agents covering him as were covering Jill Biden in the same region at an indoor event. She had 12 post holders covering her. Again, no statutory or constitutional authority for the First Lady. Donald J. Trump was had 4 Secret Service agents assigned. And I think even when you look at the debacle of a failure of the advance team to actually secure the perimeter and to deny the obvious sniper hotel locations where a bad guy is going to set up from, to the complete lack of coordination and communication, not communicating with the local law enforcement, not taking the radios of local law, come on, to even when shots were fired, the clumsy, unprofessional way of getting the protectee off the X. There was catastrophic failure across the entire enterprise.
Thank you. Mr. Bongino, I want to turn to you real quick. As somebody with a lot of experience in the Secret Service, is it correct, sir, that you, at this point, have members of the Secret Service whistleblowing and calling you right now to talk to you about the culture of the Secret Service?
There were so many. It's getting to the point now where I thank them and say, but I've already heard that from 10 other guys. And I bring that up because none of these problems are new. Anybody telling you that is lying directly to your face, and you better hope they're not under oath. Anyone is suggesting in a congressional hearing or elsewhere that these problems are new, the personnel problems, the logistics problems, the manpower problems, the technology problems. I just told you a sad running joke in the service when I was there. I'm gone since 2011. Last time I checked, it's 2024. It was yesterday's technology tomorrow. And other things here that are inexcusable that have been brought up before, like Ben and Erik just brought up. The communication failures are basic. This isn't like the Secret Service $1 million radio system that uses NSA-level encryption magically broke down that day. They literally handed them a radio they didn't take. This is why when Congressman Mills says, you know, borderline criminal negligence, you should take that seriously. What could possibly be your excuse to say, you know what, I don't really need to communicate with the law enforcement guys out there on the scene. We asked to, they had no obligation to be there. It's a Secret Service's job to protect the president. Out of a courtesy, they showed up. And you don't even have the respect of these local law enforcement people, respect for them to take the radio? I mean, where was the CP, the command post? The way this works, so everybody understands, or it's supposed to and didn't that day, for reasons still unexplained outside of, again, obscene negligence, any trip for a high-level protectee, you're supposed to have a command post that runs the whole trip at the airport or whatever. They'll communicate with everyone. But those individual sites, like in Butler County, have security rooms themselves, which are kind of mini CPs at each site. Where was it? According to what Ben said before, and from what I've heard, it was either not there or the locals were running it, offered communications, and the Secret Service, whose job it was that day to protect President Trump, said, we're going to pass on the comms. Really, you described it as catastrophic. He's 100% correct. Erik knows exactly what he's talking about. Just apocalyptic failure.
My last question is for Ben Shaffer. In your opinion, Mr. Shaffer, why were counter snipers in AGR that had access to the entire building, from what we've been told, not able to see Crooks crawling up the roof when we've seen several videos from the ground level taken by bystanders and individuals not even tasked to be doing security, were able to photograph Crooks wearing no camouflage, crawling on a white roof? Why were the snipers, the local snipers, not able to see Crooks and dispatch of him?
I can only pass this knowledge through secondhand communications. I was not privy to that location or to survey that ahead of time. Although I have spoken to those individuals that were placed in that room that day, based on the depth of the room, their placements, and the limited field of view that those windows provided. They were pretty narrow, as most standard residential windows are held. The angle was too hard for them to see that far to their east, which if they would have been facing south.
Mr. Shaffer, I just need you to kind of confirm the nose. And when I say confirm the nose, you'll understand. Didn't take the communication platform that was given by local forces, correct?
That's correct.
Didn't take the surveillance drone offered by local forces, is that correct?
That is correct.
Didn't show up for the morning briefing to ensure that last-minute planning could be accounted for?
That is correct.
Didn't take any necessary measures to talk to the Kubota dealer, who was 400 yards away to the 12 o'clock direct line of sight, to even see whether or not they could gain access to that rooftop or talk to the owner?
That is correct.
Did not access the water tower, which has the highest vantage point, and provide oversight that would have also looked at the AGR building?
That is correct.
You know, I'm looking at all this and I'm noting a lot of no's of things that didn't happen. And unfortunately, because we've allowed this to go on for weeks and weeks, we're now going to be faced with the fact that they're going to be memorializing all these documents to reflect July 9, July 10, July 11, dotting I's, crossing T's that wasn't actually going forward.
Could you please play the shooter on roof behind President Trump angle video? And as we get this queued up and we start to play it, I'm going to I'm going to ask you some questions. I'm going to start with you, Mr. Bongino, trying to through the question that I'm wrestling with, a lot of Americans are wrestling with, which is whether or not the failures here that we're all observing, everybody agrees there was failure, almost catastrophic failure, and certainly catastrophic for Mr. Comparator and his family. But was there more? Was there willful blindness here? So if you could cue up the video, that'd be great. They've got that queued up. If they don't, then I'm just going to go ahead and proceed.
Great gentlemen. So we're going to bring him up for Can we bring him up for a couple of minutes? You get ready, McCormick. You get ready. I'll get you up here. The world will see a vibrant Republican.
See beyond the president, you can see the shooter moving across the roof. Now, I look at this as someone who is a prosecutor, had worked in the U.S. Attorney's Office, had worked in the Attorney General's office, not as someone who was a sniper like Mr. Mills or Mr. Crane, working the Secret Service. But to be very clear, the perimeter, the building he shot from is outside of the perimeter. And the video we see, we can see him clearly just a mere 130 yards away. So here's the setup that I want to ask. I'm going to start with you, Mr. Bongino. Do you believe that you can just chalk up to mere incompetence that the Secret Service did not attend the 9 o'clock meeting for scheduling purposes? They literally just didn't attend. Can you chalk up, and just, I'm going to go down the list and just jump in. Can you chalk up to mere incompetence the conversations about the communications that we talked about before, where you didn't have a body present and they were using the cell phones, and they did not retrieve the radios, as Mr. Higgins has reported? Can you chalk it up to mere incompetence that they identified Crooks about an hour ahead of time, and that the President Trump, was never removed from the stage? They didn't delay, they didn't hold him back, they didn't remove him from the potential danger. That the perimeter did not include the buildings around over here, and to the extent, should there have been a perimeter that was farther out, and to the extent that the perimeter wasn't farther out, that they at least make sure the building wasn't covered. Is that just incompetence? Is it just incompetence that there was no drone being flown and the drone was turned down by the Secret Service? Was it just incompetence that the shooter had a drone, as the FBI director testified in front of the House Judiciary Committee, that he literally had flying within a couple hundred feet of the stage the same day, mere hours before the shooting? Is it just incompetence, what we're hearing now about the whistleblower saying that there were no canines? Was it just incompetence that there wasn't sufficient policing along the security border? Was it just incompetence that there was allegedly an abandoning of the post due to heat? That there was supposed to be someone on top of the roof and that they didn't get on the roof because it was too hot? Is it just incompetence that there was additional security requests turned down, according to the memos that we saw out of Senator Josh Hawley, and encouraging agents not to request additional security requests? And was it just incompetence what we saw with respect to the police body footage, which I'll play here in just a second, if we could cue up the police body footage video, where you've got the local police talking about what they said to the Secret Service? If y'all could play that video real quick, and then I want you to respond.
Well, body's that's a good word. I told them they need to post the guy over here. I told them that the Secret Service. I told them that Tuesday. I told them to post guys over here.
I have no contact with you.
What?
I thought you guys were in the room.
No, we're inside.
Alpha 1, Bravo 1. Thank you.
Okay, that's good. Thank you all. Mr. Bongino,
I told them to post
can you
guys over here.
respond to that?
I wasn't even concerned about it because I thought that's all we the guy walking back.
Can you respond to that?
Sure.
Can you respond to that question? Because that's what the American people want to know.
You know, Congressman, if you had just ended with your first statement and said, well, we may have screwed up the perimeter, you could maybe attribute it to ignorance. Layered incompetence always means intent, correct? So I'll give you an example. You're in a mall parking lot, it's 97 degrees, and you leave a kid in there, and you close the door. Did they intend to kill the kid? Probably not. But how stupid do you have to be to do that? So in Secret Service training, you're basically taught a ring-based system, but don't think of it as rings. Think of it as a three-dimensional ring, like a bubble with rings. So you got this circle, but it's three-dimensional above and below. In that outer ring, again, this is Secret Service 101, Charlie Brown encyclopedia stuff. This isn't like advanced level PDT, protective detail training. In that outer ring, you have police officers. That outer ring is out to about 1,000 yards, which is about what a really technically proficient sniper can hit. Why was the perimeter set? Again, absolute total incompetence. But then factor in the other things, and I just want to add a few more. How is it that a counter surveillance unit whose actual job is to detect, to counter surveillance, that's what they do. They're the best at what they do. We asked the question during the conversation we had earlier. How is it that they missed this guy roaming around when the police officers, clearly using their good law enforcement instincts, said we've got a problem? The answer is because they weren't there. Is that incompetence, or is that shutting the door in 97 degrees with your kid there going, I just didn't know? How did you not have a roof line 130 yards away secured when you're taught day one in Secret Service training that the effective range of a really quality sniper is out to 1,000 yards? How did you not have a drone that not only did you not have a drone, again, this is where we get to the shutting the door in 97 degrees and pretending you didn't know. It was offered. They offered you a drone. It's unforgivable. And just think of the rings quickly, and I'll wrap this up. So in the outer ring, you have police officers, you have counter surveillance, and you have a protective intelligence team. Protective intelligence team is trained to go and find threats. They miss them. There's no counter surveillance team. The cops catch it, but because the comms break down, they miss it. In that middle perimeter, you have what they call post standers. Post standers they're not DTD agents. They're field office agents. They're not Donald Trump detail agents. Those guys were not even Secret Service. They were HSI, most of them, who are great guys and were fantastic. But that's not what they do. If you grab me as a former Secret Service guy and said, hey, Dan, can you go do a Homeland Security investigation? No, that's not what I learned. We are training Secret Service agents to do protection so we don't have to use other entities that don't do protection. So that's the middle perimeter. So that breaks down. The inner perimeter, as you just saw, and I'm glad you played that video, envision that as what we would call the shift, the body guys, right? He's got a shift around them and supervisors. Everyone missed that guy crawling across the roof when he defeated the external, the middle, and the internal perimeter. You shut the door in 97 degrees. I'm sorry. Layered intent, layered incompetence like that is absolutely intent.
I'll let some of the experts on that subject follow up on that. I think there's probably some more follow-up there. I just want to ask one last question, my last minute of time. Mr. Bongino, we talked about this before. I have seen credible information, the extent to which the shooter had significant explosives that were sophisticated beyond that you would expect some 20-year-old just to put together, and that he had sophisticated detonation devices on his person, or a sophisticated detonation device. And importantly, that his digital footprint is completely MIA, that his digital footprint is missing. And that how can a 20-year-old in today's time have no digital footprint? So do you have any thoughts on that, any comments on that? And that'll be my last question.
Well, 4 years of doing protective intelligence investigations with the Secret Service, interviewed probably hundreds of people who have credibly threatened our protectees. I've never seen anything like it. If you would have told me it was a 60-year-old guy who had lived most of his life without a computer and for the last 10 years have been planning this, hard to believe but digestible. You're telling me a 20-year-old kid who's grown up in the digital era figured this out when he was, what, 13, to never get an online presence? We've seen nothing. Nothing. We're now 6 weeks in. There's not a Facebook photo. You know, it's incredible. We know every single thing about these shooting incidents when there's a political narrative to be had by the media and the other side. We do. You know who their high school girlfriend was. Sadly, you know everything about these people. We know nothing about this guy. And sophisticated explosives, we have this massive law enforcement bureaucracy. No one's got him with an online search history at a library saying, how do I build this? He's 20 years old. It just defies logic. I can tell you, again, 4 years doing these exact investigations, never, ever seen or heard anything like this in my life.
When, Mr. Shaffer, you were talking to us earlier about moving to texting. The counter snipers were texting. What does that do with your ability to stay on glass?
Was a secondary or possibly even a third method of communication as it was utilized that day. The sniper teams in the law enforcement concept sometimes are not a team. Sometimes we're deployed into situations where we're a single operator. So we're not only responsible for the surveillance aspect of the service we provide, but also having that deadly threat ability on board. So that can be very distracting in that point in that day. That third level of communication would have pulled us away from our primary responsibilities to provide that deadly cover if needed.
Thank you. And Mr. Prince, you mentioned security bubbles, and I want you to elaborate on that because we've talked a little bit about the perimeter. And the perimeter seems oddly narrow in this particular instance. Can you talk about security bubbles and the perimeters here?
As Dan was talking, right, the normal of that bubble is out to 1,000 yards based on how far a capable sniper can take a shot. The fact is, clearly this bubble was less than 100 yards because they disregarded the industrial facility, the water tower, et cetera, and it speaks to the lack of seriousness of Secret Service leadership in how they were conducting these missions. I don't think they regarded Trump as a worthy protectee. They were doing the absolute minimum. And I say my greater concern is as you look at all the litany of failure is long and deep. And if it tips towards malice, that opens up an entirely different can of worms.
Right.
Because it's hard to be part of a republic with people that actually want to kill you.
Right.
Political disagreement, fine. Sell it at the ballot box. But if people don't want to sell it at the ballot box, then it gets sold by a cartridge box. And that's a very, very dangerous road to go down.
Right. And well, we could go on that. I know some of my other my colleagues might want to do that as well. But I want to get to one last point, and that before I run out of time, and that is another failure. I think everybody here is probably, everybody up on this group anyway, has been with a president or a protectee, and there's been some kind of security hold. I mean, we've just stopped, and you say you're going to hold. Why was there no security hold put on Trump at any time if you had some kind of individual? I mean, that Mr. Shaffer has described actually did arise to a threat level. Why was there no security hold put on President Trump? Why was he allowed to go on the stage? Why wasn't he taken down? Why didn't we see a pause?
That for me?
Yeah, Dan.
What makes your question even more impactful is every Secret Service site for a high threat level protectee has what they call a holding room, which you would guess is for holding the protectee. I see Congressman Gacy because it's actually called the holding room. Yeah. The holding room is for things just like this. The holding room is, let's say a congressman shows up and is a little late. There's an accident. They'll hold him in the holding room saying, enjoy. You all have been in it. None of this is new. You've been in the holding room. There's a Secret Service agent at the door. You guys have congressional hardpins. A staffer escorts you in. Every one of you has seen this or will in the Trump administration. This is not a mystery to anyone. Why was he put on what Erik had called, accurately so, the X? We use the exact same terminology as the military. The X is where that protectee or that limo with the protectee in it is. Why was he put on the X? You have an open threat. Ben is described and your timeline lays out was there for an hour. I'm not going to play any word games. Were they a threat or suspicious? Well, if you're a threat, it's because you're doing something suspicious. And if you're suspicious, it's because you could be a threat. These are silly, stupid word games. You know when it's not a threat? When your CSU or PI team goes and grabs the guy and determines he's not a threat. Until then, your question's accurate. You put him in the holding room, which is the point of the holding room.
Can I ask one question? So I just want to follow that up. And you made the point earlier about counter surveillance. There were no counter surveillance teams there. There's a public domain videos of him, Mr. Crooks, wandering around. Was there anything in his behavior wandering around that if he would have had a counter surveillance team there, it would have triggered an interaction with this guy earlier?
I'm going to answer yes, but respectfully, and I know you understand, the CSU and PI teams are trained in very specific behavioral indicators that would give off, and speaking about them openly would probably give operational knowledge to bad guys. I know you understand that, but the short answer is not only one, but many behavioral indicators he was giving off that if we could talk in a secure setting, you'd be like, how did they miss this? The CSU team would not have missed it if they were there, which they weren't.
I want to read a text to you and see what your thoughts are on this. Do you know who Joe Kent is?
Who was
Mr.
that?
Bongino? Joe Kent, he's running for Congress right now, Special Forces guy,
Oh,
Army,
yes.
up in Washington.
Yeah.
This is a text he sent me on, I believe, Monday, August 19th. He said, "Hey, brother, I know you are doing an independent J13 investigation. I want to share this anecdote with you from my experience with Speaker Mike Johnson's U.S. Secret Service detail this weekend. Bottom line up front, Speaker's detail was incredibly lax, failed to seal off all entrances to a very small venue. Johnson wasn't secured and very easy to access. Long version. We had a local steakhouse host my fundraiser with the Speaker. Location was only available after people RSVP'd. But the entrances to the steakhouse had Kent for Congress signs on the two entrances. One entrance was inside the hotel, one out on the street in a busy pedestrian area. I arrived about 45 minutes early to check out the venue and to make sure my team had stuff ready. I also wanted to see if the U.S. Secret Service had a checkpoint set up. I carry everywhere. I planned on leaving my pistol in a hotel room my team had there. I entered the hotel, followed the Kent signs into the steakhouse, and immediately walked up to the unsecured holding room the Speaker was in. He was on a call, so he did not notice me. Neither did any of his detail. His detail was inside the restaurant just BSing. No control over the two entrances at all. Once the event started, they put on a good show and looked the part. I can't interpret their intent, but they failed a basic, simple task. Secure the two entry points, a shocking level of incompetence. The event was in Vancouver in the shadow of Portland, Oregon. Mr. Bongino, is Speaker Johnson, what's his job?
Well, that would be Capitol Hill Police, but it speaks to a larger issue with these security failures. What was mentioned about 3/4 of the way through that text, where everything becomes about optics. I'll give you just a quick example. You know, think about this. Why are Secret Service agents out there wearing suits? You don't see that with a lot of Israeli Shin Bet and others because the threat over there is existential every day. I mean, these are little things. You're worried about optics and what people look like, red ties on agents and guys who've got their shoes shined when you're not worried about door kickers who are going to keep you alive. The good show part is a problem, and it's ubiquitous, whether it's DSS, whether it's Capitol, whether it's Secret Service. We have to start focusing on job tasks and not, operational optics or who's got the freshly pressed suit on. These guys have to be out there ready to go into action and defeat that 15, 20-man Hezbollah team or group of Sicarios Erik's talking about before. This was a 20-year-old kid who broke them down. Can you imagine if they had detonated, taken out that fence line, and rushed a 10, 15-man team in there with rifles and heavy weapons? There would have been a mass murder scene. That motorcade would have never gotten out of there.
Yeah. Mr. Prince, I heard you had an interesting take on a public episode that I heard you doing an interview on. A lot of Americans believe that this was possibly an inside job, just based on everything that they've seen leading up to the assassination attempt. They saw efforts to impeach Donald Trump. They saw efforts to, put him into bankruptcy. They saw the DOJ weaponized against him, and they saw, folks try and put him in jail for 750 years, and then this happens. I know you have an interesting take on that where you really don't believe that. Can you go ahead and share that with this panel today?
You're right. There is a long list of ways that the one political party has weaponized all aspects of government in our society against their political opponent. And that is exceedingly dangerous for the survival of the republic, because that can go both ways. I don't think this was a grand conspiracy, another shooter, etc. Because if there was a second shooter, when the 20-year-old was shot and the Secret Service detail did an awful job of getting Trump off the X and let him stand up again, great instincts of the president to come back defiant, having just been shot in the head, to come back and say, fight, fight, fight. great instincts on him. He never should have had the opportunity to do that because his detail should have put him horizontal and moved him off there immediately. If there was a second shooter, it was a prime time for them to be shooting. So I don't believe there is a second shooter. I think this is a litany of incompetence. And it speaks to, as we also remember the anniversary of the debacle of Afghanistan, our problem is we have a federal government that doesn't have any accountability in any way, shape, or form. And I push back on you in Congress to affect the bureaucracy the one way that they care: cut their damn budget. Starve them out. Nothing else will get their attention other than their starvation.
I've learned a lot in this session, and here's what I think I've picked up. One thing did not go wrong that resulted in President Trump being shot. Mr. Bongino explained the 3 different layers and the lack of air controls. Mr. Shaffer explained the comms breakdowns. You got the paperwork back and forth with the field office and headquarters. So all these things are going wrong. So then the obvious question is, why did that systemic cascading failure occur? And I think you've given us really good testimony as to why. First, it's Bongino saying, well, this was bound to happen based on these structural failures, with technology failures, with this embrace of DEI and a quota system. You had a very low floor to start with. And then I don't want to bury the lead here. You heard Mr. Prince's testimony that he believes that a motivation here might be they just didn't deem Trump a sufficiently worthy protectee, and that could inform on it. And then I think the most damaging, and I never really contemplated until you gave the testimony, Mr. Bongino, that giving the Trump detail the assets they requested, air, additional manpower presence, more folks, so that not everything is pushed out to locals, but indeed is the folks that have gone through the type of training that you provided in Maryland. Well, that was because that kind of a force posture could make Trump appear more presidential, more ascendant, more in charge. And I do think that in addition to what Mr. Prince has said about budget, there are things Congress can do to direct specific demands for documents around those 3 vectors and work on all of them. To the structural issues, Mr. Prince, is it something leadership can fix? Because one thing we've found is that you try to put downward pressure on any budget around here for anything, and it's like you're committing a war crime. And in some cases, we've seen some agencies improve when you get the right leadership in and can administer an effective agency. What's your perspective on that?
I remember in the late 80s, during the Iran-Contra crisis, controversy, and the CIA was not being forthcoming with some documents that Congress had requested. And of course, the Democrats were in charge of Congress then. Tip O'Neill was the speaker. He made it very clear that he was specifically withholding all the pay for all the SIS, the Special Intelligence Service, Senior Intelligence Service officers at CIA headquarters until those documents were delivered. Shocker, the documents were delivered by Friday to the Congress. Bureaucrats will respond to very specific pain points. I think it even speaks wider than this debacle in Butler, Pennsylvania, but the fact that and it speaks to under-resourcing Trump. They no-resourced Bobby Kennedy, RFK, when his uncle assassinated while president, his father assassinated while attorney general for the act of politics in America, and they denied him. So it is not too much to surmise that a politicized Secret Service succumbing to the whims of Jill Biden, sending 4 post holders to cover Trump, 12 to cover Jill Biden. At that point, no coverage of Bobby Kennedy. Again, this can only be solved. Congress has the power of purse. Use it as a large bludgeon.
Yeah, Mr. Shaffer, is there any dynamic you think I've missed in sort of summarizing this as, low agency performance generally layered with the other dynamics that the other witnesses have shared?
I don't believe so, Congressman. I think you've covered most of the relevant points in describing how that posture all relates and how this, began as maybe a single failure and multiplied into a much greater failure, just based on different levels. I'll say that the local law enforcement agencies that were involved that day, both tactical and non-tactical, were improvising, adapting, and overcoming to a lack of intelligence that was provided to them that day. In my historical background, in the Marine Corps, these types of events require planning, require reconnaissance, require intelligence in multiple stages. It requires rehearsals, things that were not seen in this event for this day. My knowledge is when I came onto the scene that morning, that I was fed multiple briefs and multiple maps of the area. I gathered information as much as I could the night before, which is about the same time as my commander had received the briefings for that day. So we really felt like we were on the back foot and just tried to overcome that throughout the day and gather what we...
Thank you, Mr. Gates. I want to go over some forensic questions because I think that as we continue to peel the layers back, what we don't find is enough answers, but more questions that need to be asked. Just in a quick yes or no, do you find it odd that literally only days after the attempted assassination on President Donald J. Trump, while the roof was too sloped to place individuals for counter-sniper operations, that it wasn't too sloped to a roof for the FBI to go ahead and tamper, in my opinion, with evidence by washing the roof off that may have had significant evidence on it? Do you find that odd?
Yes, I do, Congress.
Mr. Prince?
Yeah, I certainly don't realize, I don't understand what the rush was to wash a roof.
Mr. Bongino?
No doubt.
Do we also find it odd that, as of recent, one of our colleagues, Representative Higgins, had uncovered the fact that the body of Matthew Crooks had not only been released and cremated, but that the coroner who's responsible for releasing the body had no knowledge of it? Mr. Shaffer?
Yes, absolutely.
Mr. Prince?
Sounds like destruction of evidence.
Mr. Bongino?
Given the gravity of what happened, absolutely.
Do you also find it odd that no ballistics, no toxicology report, no confidence in the actual, I guess, proof of who it was who took the shot has been provided to date? And also, just to follow on to that, how quickly the crime scene at the home was actually released before any evidence had been obtained and released? Mr. Shaffer?
In total analysis of your question, I think it warrants maybe a little more than a yes or no. I absolutely find that to be troubling. I also find that there were multiple friendlies that engaged the shooter that day, and no report has been given back to that local agency that was involved in that information. I feel that's critical.
Mr. Prince?
Yeah, again, there's a lot of things that just smell around the entire thing, and like I said in my opening statement, only the disinfectants of transparency will clean this up. And so covering it up and hiding only compounds an a really bad look on the federal government.
Mr. Bongino?
Yeah, I'll say again, given the gravity of the situation, extremely odd.
Do we find it odd that in addition to a 20-year-old not having a social media presence and being scrubbed, that in addition to having the knowledge on how to create sophisticated explosive devices with a multi-channel transmitter, that there was also leaked evidence or leaked information on regards to 3 encrypted accounts? Do you find it odd that these encrypted accounts, which are overseas, has not been discussed and or talked about at any point? Mr. Shaffer?
Absolutely, Congressman.
Mr. Prince?
In the same way that Congress passed a law in 1992 that within 25 years, all things related to the Kennedy assassination were supposed to be declassified and released, why cover this up? Why, again, what is being covered and what is being covered up and why? And it makes a bad situation even worse.
Mr. Bongino?
Odd, to say the least, yes.
I want to go back to something earlier as well. Mr. Bongino, Secret Service, NYPD, worked in the actual training of it. Do you believe that a protective detail should be appointed based upon the title you carry or the threat level based upon the office in which you are to obtain?
It should exclusively be based on a threat assessment. It should have nothing to do with the title.
And do you agree that if you were the Secret Service director, that when the request came in based on President Trump's profile, based on the existing threats that would need to be mitigated, based on the request by his own officers, that that would be something that you would approve or disapprove?
There isn't a scenario where a sane, rational, well-trained Secret Service agent would deny CSU or counter-sniper assets to a threat, to a protectee with a threat footprint like Donald Trump. Not a chance.
We had some conversations earlier about the building from which Mr. Crooks was able to position himself. One of the things that's been talked about is the slope of the roof and all this nonsense. People, we've seen members, Clay Higgins, some of these guys been able to walk on that roof. One of the things that I was questioning about, nothing was deployed, given the extent that it was allowed to have the perimeter inside of that, and then allowed that guy to be able to get access to it, and all the stuff you're talking about with the rings, and they didn't even deploy anything like putting barbed wire up or anti-climb spikes or anything else, right? There was literally nothing put up to deter someone from being able to get access to those buildings. Is that correct, Mr. Shaffer? You were on site?
Yes, Congressman, that is correct.
And, I mean, would that have been, again, given that it wasn't within the perimeter, would that have been another thing they could have done? Was done something to at least limit the ability to have access to the building? Put some sort of anti-climb spikes, barbed wire, anything up around it?
Yes, there were multiple possibilities on how to defeat that or possibly take that out of play as a threat area.
A question I'd ask Mr. Prince, you raised the defunding question. I don't think anybody questions where I personally come from on desire to defund a large chunk of government to the extent that I possibly can. But that being said, I think it was Mr. Gates who laid out the extent to which you're viewed as basically a war criminal if you dare, raise those issues. But the real issue is, right, it's always the threat of shutdown, right? It's like, oh, things will shut down. And so this is my actual specific question. Mr. Shaffer, and this is a question that I don't know exactly what you're going to say to it, but as someone who's on the ground and familiar with it, was there anything, we have that video, which I'm not going to pull up for sake of time, where you've got the sniper sitting up on the roof behind the president, right, and seemed to be looking across the direction where Mr. Crooks was located. Was there at any point any rules of engagement or any orders coming down from on high that prohibited those individuals from reacting, to the best of your knowledge? Because I'm trying to figure out what was in their line of sight. And again, that's speculative from my standpoint because I'm not there.
Sure. So I can speak on both locations. So the north team, we'll call them, in the northern side of the buildings there, had a few obstructions visually to be able to engage them, to engage the shooter at that point in time. The southern team had a much better vantage point, and that speaks directly just to the location and proximity to where the shooter was located. However, going back to our earlier discussion about compromised authority, and Mr. Bongino can add to this as well, in that capacity, we don't need authorization. We don't need any other things other than the prerequisites for a threat to meet a deadly force response.
We had some reporting from Ms. Crabtree, who was here with a panel earlier and is here with us now, earlier about the potential engagement or interference, I should say, by Iranian authorities in terms of our ability to protect our president, Secret Service, and so forth. Do you have any perspectives on that and why that's particularly problematic, or anything to add about that, and how our foreign adversaries are viewing what we're seeing unfold in front of us?
Well, I want you to keep in mind that we've known about the Iranian threat after the death of Soleimani to John Bolton, Donald Trump, former President Trump, and others for well over 3 years now. So there's no, keep in mind, this is a regime that has a history of documented terror attacks who sloganeers death to America. So they're not actually, their motives are, you don't have to investigate their motives, they tell you. They've known about it. If they have, and Susan's an excellent reporter, if you're not following her, you're making a big mistake on this. I have no reason to not believe her reporting or its accuracy. She's been that good.
3 sources, if I remember correctly.
If these 3 sources are accurate, that we have been compromised and security allocation decisions are being made by people under the influence of the Iranian terror regime, then this is going to be a whole different panel if we do this again.
I just have one more question for you, Mr. Shaffer, which is, can you tell me exactly how many rounds and how many shots were fired?
Yes, so the total round count that was released after the investigations were done were 10 rounds, 8 by the shooter himself, the threat, and 2 friendly rounds after that.
The 2 rounds both making impact, or can you confirm on this?
That has not been made possible, or we have not had the opportunity to confirm that based on the withheld information of the autopsy report.
And given your involvement in this, what also have you heard on the explosives and the sophistication of the devices?
So the explosive devices that were used, the primary charge was a homemade variant known as ammonium nitrate and fuel oil, or AMFO, supposedly manufactured possibly in the residence of the home. Obviously, for those that don't know, in the construction of these types of materials, there's a process. There are things that need to be procured, and most likely those things would have been located through online means, which again leads to more questions, in this matter. And then the programming of those devices were done with a remote detonating device that was specifically designed for that purpose, most commonly used in the commercial fireworks market.
So needless to say that these types of devices being bought would have brought someone up on an FBI watch list potentially, very much so like the Pakistani individual who was arrested on July 12th who had traveled to Iran prior to coming into Houston would have been on that FBI watch list.